Batavia Windmills building local U.S. and world economies. It's with great pleasure that I introduce our two speakers, Bob Popick and Francine McGuire Popick. Many of you know them. I think probably everyone in this room knows them, actually. But I'll introduce them anyway. They're our local windmill experts who never grow tired of answering Batavia windmill questions from those of us here in Batavia and from people around the world. We get email inquiries, and half the time they go along to these folks. They're active members of the Batavia Historical Society, and Francine is a current trustee on the Batavia Public Library Board of Trustees. Back in 1994, Bob and Francine began leading the project to bring Batavia windmills back to Batavia, an effort that continues still today as additional windmills are placed around town. In 1996, and again last year in 2012, they brought the International Windmillers Trade Fair to Batavia. It's a gathering of windmill enthusiasts from around the world who were able to visit this beautiful community. Please join me in welcoming Bob Popick and Francine McGuire Popick.
Thank you, Stacy. This is a tough audience for me. I've done this for about, well, actually, I know it's been going on my 11th year talking publicly about Batavia windmills. But in my audience today, I've got many critics, real critics, so I've got to be careful what I say. Smile, Frank. Anyway, I was blessed to have many positions in my career with the city of Batavia. And when we finally got to the point where I was able to be labeled as the buildings and ground manager, and we started putting windmills up, that was my real heyday. And as those who are from Batavia and have seen our display, you know, you probably enjoy it as much as I do. We've got 9 downtown, 17 throughout the community, and thanks to Stacy and for George now, George back there, for your lovely book, and I hope everybody gets a copy of that book. It's the walking tour of our windmills, and without those people and their founders who gave us the money to put that book together, it would never be possible. So thank you both for that. Okay, when I started the windmill talk, I went out and looked for some guys who thought they might like windmills too. And I found a pretty good group of volunteers, and several of them are in the audience today. And we, worked well. We put up windmills, we took them apart, we went out and stole them off people's property. No, we borrowed them. Brought them back to Batavia, because that was our real theme, bringing them home, and which we did. Of my volunteers who helped me, Dr. Baker belongs to an organization called the International Windmiller's Society. Molinology is is a Portuguese word for the study of the wind. So, take the word molinology, throw it into of Batavia, molinology of Batavia. Nothing non-exciting, doesn't mean much. But if you shorten it up and spell it out, mob, that ended up really cool, and then they made me the godfather. So. But anyway, we're here to talk about what impact the windmill companies had on the community and the world, and the best we can do, we'll start with that. Yeah, you go ahead. All right, I'm going to use some visuals too at the time. They're not very large, but I want to explain that any photographs that I'm going to be holding up or so forth are come out and view later, so you'll really get to see the whole thing. What was Batavia like in its early days? For those who can see this photograph, that's Wilson Street. Sleigh going down Wilson Street, wood sidewalks, and some of the buildings and so forth. It shows, this is looking east from the bridge that used to be on Wilson Street under in front of McDonald's and the B&O Bank. And also looking west from there, up to the hill, you can see the Congregational Church steeple and the Newton Library building, Newton Block, Wilson Street, because it never went through. That was Batavia in its early days compared, well, you know, with our construction today, it probably looks just about like it. I'm not going to put a Jay Leno who, when he has his headlines and he throws the card around, I'll keep him here.
Bob, can you use the microphone?
Sure. Thank you, George. Okay, some of these photographs or images that we have are depicted again either in slide, as you see on the screen, and or in my hand. The U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company being the first and the eldest company looks not exciting, but this area is all water. And those true Batavians who remember the pond used to extend beyond that under the second bridge. And I always laugh when I say that statement because the city is now in thought process of adding a second bridge. Why do we need another bridge? We already have one, so we don't need a third one, do we? Anyway, the water went by. We've never proven that the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company had a race, but we know the Challenge Company did. The dam was built by the Challenge Company, forced some of the river water into their building, turned the water wheel, and then they powered their factory via the turbine. Another view of the similarities you're seeing on the screen is this view of one of the very first buildings of the U.S. Wind Engine Pump Company. Again, I say all of these photographs will be viewed later if you'd like to see them up close. In the foreground, there's a boat. That's the city of Batavia. What the heck did Batavia have a boat for? It was an excursion boat. For a whole nickel, you'd go for a ride on this boat. The boat traveled from the second bridge, where it used to be in front of BMO or McDonald's today. It picked up passengers who came in from Chicago and visiting areas, took them up to Laurel Lynn Park, which is north where the Batavia Boat Club is today, if you know that area. There was a big amusement park up there. They spent the day partying and picnicking and things like that, and then took the boat back to the train station and went back to their home. So this is a very cool photograph for that purpose. But the boat, the city of Batavia, was 60 foot long, 12 foot wide, and I think it held 120 some odd people. So, but for a whole nickel, you got a boat right. What you're seeing is a description of the different happenings through his career. You've heard Daniel Halliday's name mentioned numerous times. We're honored still to have Mr. Halliday's home in a livable condition today, and it's beautifully accepted as a community historic piece. I want to point out that there's one name up here that is very influential in the windmill industry, and that was the Van Ortrick family. That was the money family of Batavia. They went ahead and had their fingers in many, many different operations, the windmill companies included. But the Van Ortricks pretty well did what they wanted to do because money talks. Yeah, that's right. My wife just pointed out this property was the Van Ortrick's private home at one time, prior to Batavia High School once being here on this site also. So this was a fantastic piece of property at the time. Pictures are rare of that, but they're still available to the museum. The U.S. Windmill Pump Company, again, formed by the Van Nortricks and Mr. Wade and so on and so forth. And speaking of the Wade, I believe we have a distant relative in our audience. Is that correct? Yes, there he is. My wife would like you to just come up for a minute quickly and receive something from us. And I'm not sure, are you the great nephew?
I'm the great nephew.
Great nephew of Mr. Wade.
In our research for this presentation, I found a beautiful letterhead, which you can see the top of it on the screen here. And at the very top in the center above the word engine is H.N. Wade, Secretary. And when I heard that Mr. Wade was coming to our show, I thought he might enjoy a copy of this. And so I've made a copy for you of this letter. And it's a 2-page letter trying to address someone's concern about something. And then the third page is it's a photograph, which I did not copy, of the Wade's house here on Main Street in Batavia. So I thought you would enjoy having this for your collection. Okay, thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much.
You came from Virginia, is that
All
what
the way from Newport News.
Oh, all right. Great, thank
Thank
you.
That's history in the making, because, you know, to find out relatives did this or did that, or relations are still alive and come forth, that's really a neat thing. No. Okay, of the major windmill companies, and we always talk of them alphabetically, even though they didn't come in that order, the Appleton, the Challenge Company, and then the U.S. Windmill Pump Company. All three were the major windmill companies, and then we had sub companies, 3 of them. So when we had 6 windmill companies, we really had a lot of workforce going around. The Challenge Company has a lot of firsts, too many to mention, but Gene is in the audience and he's offered to give a tour of his building to anybody who would be interested. And I highly recommend that if you have never seen the inside of the Challenge Company, please take him up on that offer. Challenge Company obviously sat across the river, still there today. Gene and his family and so forth had the chimney restored, totally restored and rejuvenated, so it stands tall. And believe it or not, there's a windmill built by the Challenge Company that's on city property. And when we had our windmill show in 1996 here in Batavia, that windmill and that smokestack are inside of each other, and it was the most photographed windmill that we had at the time because of that. And you can go down there today and still see the two, the windmill in line showing Challenge Company and with the chimney in the background. This is a picture of the Challenge Company as it pretty well sits today. Gene and his people are always thinking of keeping it the best that they can do and restoring it. Several of the areas are just absolutely beautiful. If we could take time, take the furniture and put people in the one room that he has in his building, it's historically beautiful because of the fact that it looks just like it came out of the past. And technically, he hasn't touched the room much at all except sweep the floor once in a while with the dust. So, but it's a beautiful room, and part of Gene's challenge to keep the windmill industry alive through his company.
Okay, then that previous slide, the Challenge Company had this wonderful letterhead, and just going back to Gene's company, he used this logo to design and build beautiful doors that have really enhanced the look of the Challenge Company. So if you get a chance to go over there, I highly recommend that. And then the company was started in 1867 by Nelson Burr and Hugh Armstrong. And Burr was he invented a metal grinder to grind wheat, and thus leading to the manufacture of feed mills, which is a major product line of the Challenge Company. They were distinguishing themselves when they first started up against their competition here in town, which is the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company. So they created the feed mill, and it was called the Burr Feed Mill, and they teamed with Nichols, whose name you heard earlier in relation to Batavia and Elgin, and to create the Nichols Windmill. In 1872, a company president stole all the company funds, and the company was left devastated, and then they had a major fire. So despite that, the company rebuilt and reorganized as the Challenge Mill Company. And in that same 1871, there was a big fire in Chicago. I'm sure everybody remembers that. So even though the Challenge Company was insured for $20,000, they got $150 from the insurance company because there was nothing left after the Chicago fire. So the company reorganized as the Challenge Mill Company, and in 1882, the company was renamed as the Challenge Windmill and Feed Mill Company, and then the name was later simplified in 1902 to the Challenge Company. And this letterhead, there was a family called the Snows that were very influential in the Challenge Company. This is a 1902 letterhead. I love some of this old letterhead. It's just so beautiful. And so Thomas Snow was the president, and James Mayer, M-A-I-R, which is a good old Batavia name here in town, was the vice president. And in 1882, Thomas Snow purchased the Challenge Windmill and Feed Mill Company and was named secretary and treasurer, and he became president in 1887. In 1900, the Snow Windmill Company moved to Batavia. They purchased the Snow Windmill Company from Decorah. It was a Decorah, Iowa mill, and they purchased that company, renamed it the Snow Windmill Company. I may have that wrong, but anyway, I'm reading this. And then Thomas Snow was also president and treasurer of that company. He also served as president and treasurer of the Batavia Windmill Company. So these guys got around. And there was a mutual ownership amongst all these companies. And the Batavia Windmill Company was located right across the street from the Challenge Company. Thomas Snow died suddenly while on a business trip in 1903. The cause of his death was blood poisoning due to kidney disease. And in 1912, Thomas's son, Frank, was president of the Challenge Company, and Frank Snow bought the Frank Lloyd Wright House that is on Batavia Avenue. And his family, he bought it from the original owners, the Gridleys, who had purchased it in 1906. So he purchased this in 1912, and his family lived there until 1981. And coincidentally, during at least some of the time Frank Snow was president, other Snow family members served the company as vice president, treasurer, and secretary all at the same time that Frank Snow was president. So it's an interesting family, don't you think?
Our third largest a windmill company, obviously the Appleton. Connection with Appleton was from Appleton, Wisconsin. Why they came to Batavia, who knows? But there was an area behind Campana Corporation today, and it was called Van Noorderkville. How surprising that the Van Noorderks owned property in that area. And that's where the Appleton first settled. They bought an old furniture factory that was in that area and moved their windmill and other operations into that, and were fairly successful until somebody rubbed two sticks together and it burned down. Many old companies throughout history burned down. Why? Who knows? But so what were they going to do? Were they going to rebuild? Yes. The city of Batavia offered them fire protection. Come down and look at downtown Batavia or somewhere in the city. And what they did is they found a spot on the island. Everybody who is local knows where City Hall is, and the buildings that the city now occupies was part of the old Appleton manufacturing. That whole complex of the river walk from shore to shore, from the pond to the main river, was all massive buildings, all of the Appleton. When the city purchased it, they did some major renovation and had many ideas of what to do with that property, and then it ended up today as the Riverwalk and City Hall, and or as the Government Center it's called, and with the police department also. Appleton produced windmills. They produced farm machinery, like you see in the center of the letterhead there. That's a horn grinder, and pretty neat things that they made. Pearl Windmill was produced by the Batavia Windmill Company. Whoever thought that in our search for windmills that we would ever find a Pearl windmill? And it was my thoughts and responsibility to find the windmill that came back to Batavia. And I put the word out to all my collector friends. We're building a display of windmills, not for Bob Popick, but for the city of Batavia to enjoy. And so they made their hard-earned efforts to find windmills whenever they could find them and pass them on to us and so forth. Proudly can say that we have never ever spent one tax dollar on the purchase of a windmill here in Batavia. All private donations from either organizations and or people. The Pearl was found in northern Minnesota, right at the North Dakota borders, and the founder told us about it, and he said, if you want, I'll restore it for you. So he did. We went and brought it back, and so now that's our first company of the small companies to go ahead and have a windmill display. So this was a Batavia windmill company, and the model was the Pearl. And up here on our display, there is a little tabletop model of the Pearl windmill. The snow manufacturing, again, was one of the small companies. We have been able to find several items from them. An interesting thing is that you see the yard swing set. As a local windmill buff here in Batavia, I have spotted 7 of those swing sets still in existence in yards here in Batavia. Six are outside of one in my yard. So. Benjamin Danforth, came to Batavia from England, was a blacksmith or something, but his first business was horseshoe nails. And he made handmade horseshoe nails. Then he got into the windmill business. And that's a picture of his windmill. We have never found his windmill. But that prancing horse is cast iron, and it's the windmill weight, it's called, is the object of that is to balance the windmill, keep it from tipping over. It's very heavy, but that particular horse today is very rare in the collecting field. Windmill weights themselves are very collectible by the folk art people throughout the U.S., and animal shapes are very collectible, and Mr. Danforth's prancing horse there looks similar to, if you've ever seen the old weather vane horse. It's very, very similar to that, but of course that was, his is 45 pounds of solid cast iron. If we ever find that windmill, we'll be very happy to find that. But as of today, no one has ever seen the true actual windmill of the Danforth Company.
Okay. We suspect that the Danforth weight and weights that were within the windmill may have been manufactured by the Shumway foundry, which was right next to the Danforth Windmill Company. The major companies, as Lindsay talked about earlier, all had their own foundries. And even the Batavia Windmill Company, being located across the street from the Challenge Company, probably used the Challenge foundry. We suspect that that's the case. So we suspect that Danforth probably used Shumway. But again, that's one of those records that's lost in history, unfortunately. So our next topic is Batavia Windmill Company's impact on the local economy. And if we look at this is a picture Bob showed earlier. To the left, let me see if I can do this. Around this area, this is part of the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company. And as you can see, the building is right up to the street. And then it went back beyond. And, and this is the dock area where the city of Batavia steamboat pulled in. And so my point in telling you that the factory was right up to the street is because it was an integral part of the downtown. And so the men who worked in the factories would shop in the downtown, would eat lunch in the downtown if they didn't pack their own lunch. Now this is a view of the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company buildings that were on the west side of the Fox River. We saw a picture that Bob held up earlier with the city of Batavia steam engine, the steamboat right in this area. So this was just north of the train station.
Train station being Depot Museum. Point out that when you see a windmill on a tower, you're probably going to say it's a water pumping windmill, which is true in this case. But when you put it on top of a building, it's not the same thing. That's called a power mill. And that power mill produced higher horsepower, and they forced that energy into the building. And if you are familiar with the term line shafts, that building probably had several line shafts driven by the windmill, and it turned machinery. And that's the purpose of putting the windmill on top of a building like that.
All right, and the unique thing about Batavia is that all of the windmill companies were drawn to Batavia because of the river for water power. As Bob mentioned earlier, they had, the Challenge Company had its own race. We suspect that the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company also used that one branch of the river that has now been closed up as a water source. The Appleton Company was on the little island in the middle between the two windmill companies, between the western part of the U.S. company and the Challenge Company on the east side of the river. And the Danforth was also just right across the street from the river. And the Pearl Windmill Company was across the street from the Challenge and probably used the Challenge resources. And the smaller windmill companies being located on the water, that was a good source of energy for them to make their products. And then again, all of these windmill company employees, and they employed thousands of people over the years. They could all take advantage of the downtown resources. So you saw a lot of mom and pop shops and little local restaurants and things like that that people would shop at. And this is a view, this actually was a photograph on blue paper. I'm not really sure if somebody's a photographer that could tell me why it would be on blue paper, but it makes it a little more challenging to makes it a little more U.S. to identify it as the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company. But this is a view similar to what we saw earlier in T. Lindsay's photograph. This is taken from the library area looking down on the U.S. company. And this view included both the factory and offices. If you look here, there is a windmill erected on top of one of the buildings. This is the water tower that still exists today, minus the water tank. And over here was a tower without a windmill on it, so it was probably being prepared for a test or some sort of thing for a windmill.
Jerry Dempsey owns the property through family. It was Father Larry who started the company. And I used to kid Mr. Dempsey about never having a windmill on his property because he didn't want one. Why do I need a windmill? Well, Jerry, you own a windmill factory. You gotta have a windmill. Okay, so go out and find me one. So we were at a social event many years ago, and I found him at the event, and I said, Jerry, I've got you a windmill. And he says, okay, tell me about it. I said, the U.S. Wind Engine Pump Company produced their first, or their last wood model windmill, folding windmill, and it needs to be here on your property. Well, how much is it? What do I have to do? Blah, 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 blah. And I said, Jerry, think about this. The model of the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company was a Model D. D stands for Dempsey. You got to buy it, and he did. So today, Mr. Dempsey's property owns 2 Batavia U.S. Wind Engine windmills on his property, and if I could find a third one, I probably would try to offer him that one too.
Another thing I want to point out is that this was the Batavia, the one branch of the Batavia River that we think was probably used as a race or a source of water for the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company, and that has been since covered over, and so that Batavia could experience some growth, because we had so much water that we couldn't build any buildings downtown. It was even smaller than it is today. All right, now this is a picture many of you may have seen before. It's a fantastic picture of the workers at the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company. I want to point out that each of the employees is holding an implement that would have been used in the manufacture of windmills. We also have 2 what some people call salesman samples, but I don't think these ever broke down into a case, so they were probably showroom models. And these may be the windmills that are on display in the Depot Museum. We also have a big Halliday standard tail up here above the workers. So this is really quite a neat photograph. We also have, so this is Daniel Halliday, this is John Burnham, I believe I got that right. And then this is Mr. Noyes, and up here is Mr. Perry, Thomas Perry. So you heard about them earlier today.
Another thing I'd like to point out about this, and it's not clear in this one, but you see Mr. Burnham and Mr. Halliday holding something in the foreground. If your eyes will drift over to the right, you see that poster. It's not the exact poster that they're holding, but it is the same version, exactly the same version of that. So it was easy to date that piece when we bought it out from this photograph. Historically, this picture just rings out with all kinds of information. As Francine pointed out, the two salesman windmills there, that one on the table could have been one of those. Particularly that one we know was Mr. Strang's from Nebraska. So, but the same type of wood, exactly the same style. And another thing, if you see the actual photograph owned by the Batavia Historical Society, the young faces that are in there, the age of youngsters that worked in the windmill factories is astounding.
All right, and this is a photograph of the machine shop at the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company. Oops. Now, this is another one of those blue photographs that came together with the other one that I had. And there was a yard that faced Wilson Street, and you can see here is the depot. This was the original depot that was there, which has been replaced by the wooden depot that's now the Depot Museum. This was the freight house that we probably saw in those early photographs by the water. And this was Peterson Livery and Feed, so obviously they were still using horses back in this day. And this is a great big yard in which they would build these tremendous windmills. The note on the bottom of the screen says this is well, now I'm looking at it, it says 30 feet, and I put 36 feet. I think on the back of the photograph it actually said 36 feet. So this is a massive windmill here.
Another thing that's pointed out, as Francine said, that is Wilson Street there. It doesn't look like a street, but that dark strip is Wilson Street. But this items right here are a set of railroad crossing gates. And so they actually, when a train came through from the south or east to the north, that they dropped the gates. Right around the corner, there was a gateman on a pole, and he would know the schedule of the train. When he saw the train coming, he would get off his pole, come down, lower the gates, stop the horse and buggy or whatever, and then the train went by and carried on and so forth. So you're looking north from the old U.S. Wind and Pump Company.
And this part of the factory, these buildings were torn down, and this is where the strip mall is that contains Walgreens and Panera's, okay? Just to give you a perspective. Now, unfortunately, when the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company closed, all the records and drawings by the scores were dumped into trucks and hauled away and never to be seen again. And so we don't have a lot of records about how many people they employed, what their sales numbers were, but we are going to start talking about the challenge numbers. We were lucky enough to get some information from John Gustafson, care of the Historical Museum, in which he did a recap of statistics that appeared in 1881 from the Batavia Weekly News. And it reported that the company had been successful since its founding and had continued to grow after rebuilding from this 1872 fire we talked about earlier. The company only received $150 from insurance, as I mentioned. So from 1869 to 1871, the company, this is right, pretty much, it started in 1863 in Batavia, but the first record of employment was 30 to 50 men. In 1881, the company employed 40 hands, as they called them, working 10 hours a day. There was also overtime to keep pace with actual orders, so the men frequently worked overtime. In 1894, they added a foundry and a large storage building. In 1896, the annual output was $500,000 and 200 people were employed. Started construction on a 3-story building to house a storehouse, machine shop, and new office. So that was the building that we saw with the tower on it. By 1897, they had added a new casting storage building and tank shop. So you can see the company is really growing here. By 1898, an office was opened in Dallas, Texas, and Challenge purchased the Decorah, Iowa windmill factory in that year. Machinery and equipment will be moved to Batavia and Geneva, is what the newspaper quoted. And by 1901, 2 new buildings, the gasoline engine department and the steel tank department, were developed. And it was around this time that the gasoline engines started to come to the forefront. And so Challenge, as most companies, would develop additional products to keep competitive and to keep sales up and to keep their employees employed. In 1904, plans were made for a new dam to cost $10,000. Wouldn't that be nice? A new dam in Batavia, which is so highly contested, and on the back burner due to the state of Illinois financial situation. Wouldn't it be, it probably might be a no-brainer if it was only $10,000. I hope not, though. But in 1905, the company planned to build 2 new large additions. Oops. In 1907, Frank Snow was made general manager. In July 1918, about 600 workers from the Challenge, U.S., Appleton, Sperry, and Shumway, Sperry and Shumway were foundries, went out on strike because they wanted an additional 10 cents an hour. And by June of 1919, the strike continued. So that's a year, with the workers now asking for 15-cent pay raise. An 8-hour day, no piecework, and a closed shop, all union conditions. And that's an important thing, because one of the reasons why U.S. came out from Chicago originally was because Chicago had unions, and they wanted a workforce that was not unionized, and so that was another attraction to Batavia. The news article does not relay how long the strike lasted or how it was settled. And by 1930, the company employed 200 men, so we're kind of remaining stable. But by 1940, the company employed 175 men. So you can see the amount of employees is going down. And in 1945, when a lot of these companies were asked to change production to war reparation. And in 1945, the Challenge Company was bought by the Batavia Metal Products Company for $325,000. In July 1946, the Batavia Metal Products was implicated in a scandal with the federal government. And then in August of 1946, the 2 plants were sold to Roush Industries. And in 1950, the Challenge Company was bought at a federal court sale by Universal Trailer Corp. and then subsequently sold many times, or at least a few times after that. So that was kind of the end of that article. So I have some other photographs here that Lindsay showed earlier. This is the Challenge Company. This was the sheet metal department. So I will just kind of quickly go over these because these are repeats of what he showed you. If I can get my next page going here. And these are two photos. All these photos were taken around 1900. The core room is on the sheet metal department is on the left, and the core room that was adjacent to the foundry is on the right. I think I have that right. The workers on the left are punching holes in steel tower sections. So when you buy a windmill, the tower comes with the pre-punched holes. Did you bring your hole puncher with you? Bob did bring a tool manufactured by the Challenge Company that punches holes in towers, because sometimes you get towers that were pre-punched and the hole just wasn't in the right place. And so they sold a hole puncher, so you can come up and see that later. So we talked about the foundries earlier and how each of the major companies had them. And I have one more picture of the foundry where molds were used to pour for metal castings and parts.
I think I mentioned that in 1996 we hosted the Windmiller Trade Show, our very first. And our guest speaker that day for our windmill show was named a gentleman from El Paso, Texas, by the name of Tex, T-E-X, Burdick. Mr. Burdick owned a windmill and a pump company, and what he did is he flew his airplane up to Midway Airport, got on the train, and then came out on the third rail to Batavia. Physically walked from the train station on Wilson Street to the Challenge Company, made his dealings. He would buy a boxcar full of windmills at a time. Then he had them shipped back to El Paso, where he sold them and erected them. And on the tails of the windmills were either Burdick and Burdick or Tex Burdick Windmill Company. Dr. Baker wrote a book. It's called Blades in the Sky. And it was a life of Mr. Burdick erecting the windmills and how it was to live in those days and so on. When Tex came and spoke at our windmill show, we had what we called Old Timers Day. We found several employees who were still with us. We had two houses set up, one at the US and one at the Challenge, where our visiting windmillers could question the windmillers who used to work in the factories. So they got to ask really good questions and so forth. Tex Burdick was going to be the guest speaker that evening, but he attended the one at the Challenge Company. And he got up in front of the crowd and he wanted to thank the windmillers who worked in the factories, those who are still alive that day. Thank them for building a fine windmill that he was able to procure and go ahead and keep his business alive. Tex Burdick was 96 when he came to our show. He died at 103. We, Francine and I, were invited to his 100th birthday party in El Paso, and we said we'll never get another invitation like that, so we went down to his birthday party, which was really neat. Tex Burdick was a heck of a storyteller. I can't go into all of them today, but he told yarns about sleeping out with the rattlesnakes under a windmill, or the area that a windmill was going to be put up the next day or so forth, how they erected the windmill, and he and his helpers just slept out in their blanket rolls and so forth. One quick story about he did tell us. They're sitting around the campfire at night, and cowboys used to use the signal, hello, in the camp. That was yelled in to who's coming into the camp. So they said, come on in. So in came this strange looking cowboy carrying his saddle, and where his horse was, who knows. So they talked to him a little bit and found out that he had not eaten, so they shared their grub with him in that evening. So they're sitting around the campfire that night. And this stranger to them, again, no name, started talking, and he says, and he takes out his revolver, and he empties the revolver into his hand. This is a story that Tex is telling us. And he's flipping the cartridges up in the air and catching them and so forth. And Tex didn't know what was going on, and there his helpers and Tex were listening to the story this guy's telling, and the guy says, what would happen if I took my cartridges and threw them in the fire? And Tex sort of shook his head and said, that's not a good thing to do. And all of a sudden, kaboom, the gentleman threw the cartridges into the fire. Well, his Mexican helpers all took off. They ran out and Tex went somewhere out of the way. And finally the cartridges did explode in the fire. And for no reason at all, they never did know why he did that. The next morning after they all went to bed, early in the morning, they looked out and the stranger was gone. So they don't know who he was, whether he was a bandit or just a real cowboy type guy or whatever. But there's one story he shared with us about what you did at night.
Nighttime entertainment in the camp. Oh, now we're going to talk a little bit about the Appleton manufacturing plant. Again, this is on the island, on the west side of the main branch of the Batavia, what is now the west side of the main branch of the river. And then I have some pictures here. We're going to kind of try to speed this up. So again, pictures of the workers in front of the building. And going back to this one, sorry. On the left here, there are windmills, wooden sections standing on end, a wooden wheel standing on end. So that's one of the reasons we know it's a windmill worker photograph. More Appleton workers, and then again, just some more workers here. And again, this is the limestone building that is now the city government building in downtown Batavia. And again, all of these workers, you'll note that a lot of them have hats on. They worked with the hats on, and they always had their hats on. That was, I think, a polite way that people were back in those days. And so that's one more shout out to the Appleton workers there. So we were talking about how those workers themselves helped with the economy by spending money in Batavia. And another thing that I wanted to point out, this was a huge estate called the Dunham Estate in Wayne. And this is an example of a challenge double-header windmill here, which we will show you pictures of from Salinas, California. So companies like this, local farms like this, benefited from free publicity by allowing the windmill companies to place their operations in their catalogs. So they undoubtedly got free publicity, etc. And unfortunately, this mill no longer exists. Knowing that it's this close to us, it would be so awesome if it still did exist. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Batavia Windmill Company's impact on the U.S. economy. I noted something earlier that Chris Gillis said that Aeromotor made a lot of transmission towers, and I want you to know that like Aeromotor, the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company also made transmission towers. And we were contacted by a person in Arizona who told us that there was a number of them there, which we had never seen before. And then we personally climbed a U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company transmission tower, or actually it was a fire observation tower in New Mexico. Halfway up, I saw a plaque that had the U.S. Logo on it. So that was, it was really exciting. So there was actually a fire going on at the time, and so we got to go up and observe. There was a gentleman up there with a camera looking out at the fire and reporting to the airplanes where to drop the chemicals to try to put the fire out. It was an exciting day.
The windmill did several things, but its main purpose was to pump water for human consumption, animal consumption, and the railroad industry. If it wasn't for the windmill, the railroads would be non-existent today, but both Dr. Baker and Chris pointed out the importance of the windmill relationship to the railroad industry. Think back, think hard of the old westerns that you have seen on the movie screen and or the television, you'd see a train such as this pull up and draw water. Some of the old movies did that. What was missing? The windmill. You never saw a windmill relationship in a Hollywood movie. Our friends who were big collectors like us got really upset with Hollywood because they never showed the windmill putting the water up into that water tank. Recently, there's been a movie, and it was with Tommy Lee Jones, and The Good Old Boys was the name of the movie. And in there, it shows a water tank, a windmill. Mr. Jones, at that time, climbed the windmill, even took a bath in the tank under the windmill. So made our collector friends happy that they finally became more realistic.
And I believe many of the windmills that were featured in that movie were from a collection, was it Mr. Christopherson's collection? Do you remember, Lindsay? Okay, but anyway, one of the now deceased, unfortunately, famous windmillers. And as Bill Shoes from ASME talked about this morning, the railroad locomotives needed to refill with water approximately every 18 miles. So you can think every 18 miles there was a windmill. And there was a big competition to get those government contracts. And when the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company created the Model E, on the one side it has a big U and a big S. And a lot of people said, that must be a government mill. So typically you'd see Eclipses or you'd see Halliday Standards and then also later the Model E's. So ranchers and farmers, once they had settled their claim, erected windmills to obtain water from the depths of the ground rather than traveling miles to a stream. So that's another, that really helped with the Western development, was to have, otherwise the ranchers and farmers would have gone out there and withered, and many of them did if they didn't have the money for a windmill. The railroad also was influential because it shipped products to the ocean to be transported overseas, thus again enhancing our economy. And municipalities also use windmills to pump water into reservoirs for public use, for water consumption and putting out fires, which again were a big risk because all the buildings were made out of wood. So we've kind of covered some of that throughout the day. And then this gentleman, how would you like this gentleman to come up to your abode here? The windmill companies hired employees in Batavia, as is this gentleman. His business card says Challenge Company Batavia on it. Actually, this is a representative for Wisconsin. And the company, $100 reward if you find him in your city. And this is to announce to you that he could be out there on a given day trying to sell the challenge line, which included windmills, towers, tanks, speed grinders, lawn swings, gasoline engines, etc. So they had a nice picture of a smiling, young, well-dressed man who was trying to increase business for the Challenge and U.S. Company and other companies across the country. So the Challenge Company had offices in Dallas, Kansas City, Minneapolis, Omaha, and there probably were many, many more cities. And the major companies all had offices in different parts of the country, again, which employed a lot of people, so it helped the U.S. economy. Okay, now we're going to kind of zip through this next part, but Batavia Windmill Company spent a lot of money on advertising, as did other companies. They had catalogs, trade cards, and other promotional items made in Chicago and other major cities throughout the U.S. They also advertised extensively in farm magazines such as Farm Implement News, Western Plowman, and Implement Age, to name a few. This is a beautiful picture, could have been one that you showed early, Dr. Baker, of a Challenge catalog showing the front and the back. Lithography came into being around this time, and so the printing companies would just make these gorgeous 3-color prints. This is one from the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company, again trying to attract the ranchers out west, the cattlemen, And another U.S. wind engine and pump company one showing the factory in the corner there, and again highlighting the Halliday Standard windmill. Here's an Appleton catalog, an older one here, Implement Specialties, highlighting some of their other products, and then a newer one showing the actual factory building. This is the cover off of a Batavia windmill. Oh, I said the Pearl Windmill Company. That's wrong. I'm sorry. The Batavia Windmill Company, the Pearl, or this could be a Revolution Mill. I'm not sure. The companies also like to highlight the awards that they received, hoping that customers would say, "Oh wow, they won this award. I bet this is a great windmill. I better buy this." And so this one was received by the Challenge Company in 1879 in New York by an organization called the American Institute something of New York City. It didn't sound like a very legitimate organization, but perhaps it was at the time. And then this is an example from the U.S. Wind Engine and Pump Company. It looks, it looks like it's backwards on the screen there. So this, they hyped that they received first prize in 1876 in Philadelphia, 1887 in Paris, 1878, and all world's fairs were exhibited.
In 1892, the Columbia Exposition was held in Chicago. Color photography was not among us then, but if there's been any friction in this room up till this moment, after listening to Chris's talk about the World's Fair, we got to stand fast with Batavia, because Batavia was there at the fair. And this is the Challenge Company's display, Chris, with a 110-foot dandy windmill, which had to be taller than the. There you go. So we poke fun at each other every once in a while between the Air Motor Company and the Batavia Company. But can you imagine what this would have looked like in color? Beautiful, absolutely. Had we got. But this building here it's labeled Challenge on it, and many of the Challenge windmills. And we know, because you can read the tail, it says Dandy, and that is one of our windmills that is on display down around City Hall.
Oh, another comment that I thought I heard Chris say was that Air Motor was the only company that had a power mill at the fair. I must have misunderstood that, Chris, because the Challenge Company had the double header there. So that obviously is a power mill, and that was a very beautiful looking mill, which I can attest to, having seen the one in Salinas, California. What do you do?
You've seen several pictures of the double header in the presentation, not only today, but Dr. Baker's presentation also showed some this morning. I'm going to choke myself here. I have to reach over here and grab something. We talk about windmills in the wheel size, okay? And I'll get Francine to step out here. And I like to use the visuals. An average farm windmill today is in the 8-foot area. Stand still. There. She is standing 8 feet from me. Okay, that's the average size. The next average size was 10 to 12 feet. So that's what you were looking at for a windmill, farm style. Now we're going to talk about a little larger. What's the largest windmill that I have ever seen and or produced? The catalogs that Francine talked about 50 foot. That's big. Okay? I talked to many groups and they asked me, Bob, what's the biggest windmill you've ever touched or seen? And I tell them about this one. I said, what's the opposite? What's the smallest one? What's the smallest windmill you've ever seen? Well, I have to keep it wrapped up so I don't drop it. But that's the smallest windmill I've ever seen. So. What's the largest one that I have ever seen or touched? Again, I'd like to demonstrate with the ruler. Tell me when you get to the end.
I'm at the end.
Okay, that's 30 feet. Are you visually are seeing the wheel laying on its side, and I'm demonstrating how far 30 feet is. That's a big wheel. You're gonna roll it up. How about that for a beauty? 30 feet. 2 major wheels, back to back, and in between the major wheels were 2 side wheels of 10 foot. The purpose of the side wheels turn the main wheel into the wind whenever the wind changed direction. This is out in Salinas, California. And it's on top of a building. And this is what it looks like in the folded position. It's a beautiful sight to see this windmill. I think I heard somebody say, what's it made out of? The original windmill was wood. The Shackle Company from Virginia stayed up, took on this as a project for $1.5 million. They went to California and they took the windmill down because it was in poor condition. They went ahead and started to restore it, contacting Dr. Baker and myself and many others for help on what it was like and so on and so forth. These pictures were taken out in the state of Virginia on its test plot. They went back to the owners of the windmill and they said, this is going to be a maintenance nightmare. And it would be if it was wood. Well, what are you thinking? We want to make it out of aluminum. Well, they didn't know how to trust us. We can do it. So what they did is they took 2 sections of the wood wheel that they had or had made and weighed them so they knew how much they weighed. They went ahead and fabricated aluminum sections, which you're looking at. Didn't have the weight, so inside the blade of the aluminum blade that you see here, they added the weight to make it operational properly. So today it's an aluminum windmill. It looks as wood as you can be, and the maintenance is like nothing compared had it been of wood. So if you ever get out to Salinas, California, which is up in the San Jose area near San Francisco, it's very visible once you get into the community. You can't miss it.
All right. Now, we're just going to kind of quickly through one of the other advertising means that the companies had was they created these trade cards, which were easily left at stores or given to prospective customers, and they highlighted your line of products. And also the reverse side of the card highlighted the other products that they sold. So it was a good means of advertising to get the word out on what else the companies did. And the next one is the Dandy Steel Mill and Tower. Now, Chris was talking, again, I'm not bashing Chris here, but there was a lot of competition between the windmill companies. And the back of this windmill card really was hyping the towers, the windmills and the towers, and how they were made with the best steel that was painted or galvanized adding to its durability. And per challenge, the towers were safer and more reliable than other manufacturers' steel towers. Of course, they could claim anything, right? The towers were made with heavy angle steel, 4 corners instead of 3, like some manufacturers, and had a ladder that extended the length of the tower in the center between 2 corners, as opposed to corner steps, like some manufacturers. Challenge was encouraging customers to buy both the steel mill and the steel tower as a combo deal. So it's kind of funny. And the windmill companies also did kind of funny things to try to get people's attention. As you see on the left, this is the front side of the card. It's for the Dandy, which was at the time their leader that they were pushing in terms of windmills. This was a steel windmill. And then on the right, you see a picture, and the company challenges you, no pun intended. Can you see this little girl's grandmother? So take a look at that, and let me know if you see it. Okay, everybody there? Yeah, with the eye, right. Okay, so I think their thought was that you would find this card so cute that you would pass it around to your family and friends, thus enable Challenge to get more bang for their advertising buck. The next cards are the Halliday line of windmills. This is the Halliday Standard, and on the right is the Halliday Veinless, which instead of using a wooden tail, they used to counterbalance weights and to keep the windmill into the wind. And Dr. Baker talked at length earlier today about how those work. The next one is another line of their product at the time was the U.S. Solid Wheel. Again, this was something that they were competing against other companies that had, like the Eclipse company that had developed the solid wheel windmill. So they created their own version of this. And this is where the big US is on the wheel here, and these were often used in the railroad or government business. Okay, and then the gem was the US's first entry into the steel mills. And they hyped it as the best mill around and the most beautiful, and reports are that it didn't work very well, so unfortunately. And then this is just an advertising partnership with that the windmill companies would oftentimes go in with dealers on the costs of these trade cards. So it gave each company a win-win in terms of advertising.
The items here to my left are from our private collection over many years, and we have a lot more things. Unfortunately, our curator of the museum, Carla Hill, who's in the audience, accuses us of having the second museum in Batavia, but we like her anyway. The 3 large photographs in the back are all from the U.S. Wind Engine Pump Company. They're advertising pieces. We as the Popics have 3 full-size windmills in our yard, 3 small ones outside, and 27 in the house. That is the largest one that's on the table there. That's our largest windmill in the house. But it's fun to share with people and so forth. There's a red box in the background on the far end of the table. It's a worker's toolbox from the U.S. Wind Engine Pump Company. A couple pictures of Daniel Halliday and John Burnham and other things. Feel free to come on up after the presentation and take a look. What else did the Challenge Company do when things were tough? They went into other lines, swing sets, yard furniture. As I said, there are 7 swing sets in the city of Batavia today that I have found and still operational. Believe it or not, this is a Challenge-built exercise machine. I just found out this morning that the Batavia Foundry made the aluminum seats for this swing set for the Challenge Company. So that was sort of neat to find that out. Bob Peterson passed that along to us. So what you would do is sit on the seat, it's on the wheels, it's locked right now, but it traveled up and down the track. You'd pull on the weights, place your feet here, and exercise. So that was one of the products that they made. They also made shuffleboard sets. This Challenge up here, and they made the wood movers and so forth. We won't slide them around, but she's showing you how it works. They also made a croquet set. I'm unable to find one, so if anybody's got an old croquet set and sees the word Challenge on it, please let me know. So I'd be interested in looking at it.
The companies also made huskers. They made a lot of different kinds of pumps, decorative pumps for residential use, industrial use. They were so popular that they created their own literature for them. And let's see here. The swing set, they made haying tools and all different kinds of products. And as the companies started waning down, that's when they got real creative, making the recreational equipment to try to keep the workers employed. Okay, and I just wanted to show you quickly, and this will end up our presentation here, that Batavia, we talked about how Batavia windmills affected the local economy, the U.S. economy, and the world economy. And it certainly was, the windmill companies were world ambassadors. Here's a picture of a U.S. gem windmill in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. We recently bought, one of Bob's classmates gave him a set of envelopes from the Challenge Company that show that Challenge had a presence in Venezuela, Ecuador, and Colombia, South America, and Australia as well. And they also did business with Cuba, and the envelopes themselves are really interesting too. Cuba, obviously pre-embargo days. And then in a lot of their advertisements, they would highlight the overseas connection. So this is a trade card that shows a Challenge sectional wheel in Mexico, a daisy in Brazil, and Egypt, for a single header in Egypt. And let's see. And then I just want to end with a few photographs that we have. This is a dandy being erected at a residential facility. It's always kind of fun to find a picture with the erection in action there. This is a Challenge steel windmill in a residential facility, residential use. And here is a daisy that it was obviously damaged by the storm. You can see the broken up pieces here, and yet the family is smiling. I don't understand that. But, and then these are a couple of pictures of Halliday standards in the field. So that's the end of our presentation, and we really appreciate your patience. I think we've gone a little over time here, but thank you very much.
Feel free to come on up and look at things closer if you'd like. Ask questions of Francine and I. Dr. Baker is still in attendance, and so is Chris. So if you have questions to them, they'll sure be glad to answer. Thank you again for coming.